Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our From the Field Farm Chat with Idaho Wheat. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Ryan Mortensen, and I am the Communications and Programs Manager for the Idaho Wheat Commission. Just a reminder for all of you joining us today, we encourage and invite you to ask questions or provide comments. Just take yourself off of mute, or you can raise your hand, or you can pop that question or comment in the chat, and we will make sure to get that addressed for you. So today we have Bailey Jenks on with us today. Bailey is the Regional Commercial Manager for Limagrain Cereal Seeds, and we are going to talk about the collaboration between Limagrain and the University of Idaho and how it impacts Idaho wheat and our growers. So Bailey, I'm going to turn the time over to you. If you will just give us kind of an introduction of you and Limagrain Cereal Seeds, and then maybe if you can talk about some key personnel in the UI LCS collaboration for those who are not familiar with the program.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about the Varsity Idaho program today. So like Ryan mentioned, my name is Bailey Jenks. I work for Limagrain Cereal Seeds. I cover the Pacific Northwest region. So Oregon, Washington, and Idaho fall under my care. So within that comes the Varsity Idaho program. We have two breeders that work on that program. So that's going to be the Limagrain breeder, Dylan Larkin, as well as the University of Idaho breeder, Yiguang Wang. So they work together on, making crosses, selecting crosses, looking at data, and then once they kind of decide what varieties are the best path, have the best path forward for commercialization, that's usually where I take over. And I, talk about the varieties at field days, really figure out where they're going to fit in the industry and in the area, and then talk to retailers about where these lines really should have a home. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it. There's technically two breeding programs that we cover. So it's the Limagrain program and then also the Varsity Idaho program, which is technically a collaborative program, but we treat it as a separate program with separate germplasm, and kind of reserve those lines for the Idaho industry. So growers in Idaho should have first access to these lines. They're adapted to that area. And, in our opinion, I think those lines have a really great fit in a lot of different parts of Idaho. So it's kind of fun to be able to pick and choose from a whole breeding program to figure out, what lines will do best in certain regions.
How long has this collaboration been
So
happening?
it started in 2012. I believe back in 2011, we had started bringing in some lines from the University of Idaho program. And then in 2012, the actual agreement was made to form the Varsity Idaho program. So some of the original releases from this program, which would be UI Magic, UI Castle, and UI Palouse, those are all clear fields. They do have the UI prefix. That was because they technically predated the program. But now everything coming through the program will have the VI preface in front of it, which stands for Varsity Idaho. So anytime you see a line in any of the trial data that has VI in front of it, that comes from this program.
Okay, so Varsity Idaho, it wasn't originally Varsity Idaho.
Right.
Okay. For those unfamiliar, can you talk about the collaboration itself, what your goals are, what your priorities are, and outcomes that you hope to see with this collaboration?
Yeah, so the overall goal is, at the end of the day, I like to think that I work for growers. So at the end of the day, the overall goal of the program would be to find genetics and varieties that will bring profit to growers, that will yield a really great yield on their farm, will also protect them from diseases in the field. Coming from a program that's in the home state of Idaho, I think that's really important. Some of these other programs in the industry, Washington State, Oregon State, their germplasm is really focused on their core area of where they're at. So having the germplasm that's adapted to South Idaho and even Northern Idaho too, is a really helpful tool for growers. And however we can push those lines forward so that growers have access to those genetics, that's kind of the overall goal of this program, is to really have availability of varieties that growers will make profit off of. There's a lot of moving pieces within that. Jim has been a really great tool and asset in helping Dylan and Yugwing and I kind of figure out the road to releasing varieties. Figuring out what lines will do best where. There's a lot of different growing regions in Idaho. Northern Idaho functions very differently from Southern Idaho. So finding lines that may do well in both, but sometimes that we're not as lucky as that. So trying to pinpoint where these lines will do their best, and having the opportunity for growers to have genetics that are literally meant for their region is really important.
Part of the original goal of the program also was to take advantage of the complementary nature of the two programs.
Right.
With especially the program in LCS located in Walla Walla, with a lot of European material coming in of somewhat questionable end-use quality, tied in with the Northern Idaho program, with better winter hardiness, exceptional end-use quality, and having a chance to pull those two different germplasm bases together and then try to exploit them a bit in different directions. And I think it's worked out pretty well considering where we started in all this. But yes, there's a lot of moving pieces as Bailey indicates, and a lot of different ways to take advantage of the collaborative program as something complementary from what LCS is doing straight on.
Yeah, and to echo, what Jim said, a lot of the LCS material ends up finding a home in Washington and Oregon, some parts of Northern Idaho. It's a little bit harder for us to move some seed down into South Idaho just because of the location. So taking advantage of doing, seed production in areas where it would be easy for growers to access, and getting retailers in South Idaho, especially on board with some of these Varsity Idaho lines, I think is overall a really great option for growers. They're not having to reach out into other regions to find genetics. We're selecting them, we're producing them, and we're showcasing them in an area where growers don't have to necessarily go out and look for them. They're available for them right there in their backyard.
So Bailey, we know that weather really works well with farmers. Insert sarcasm here. So 2025 was another non-normal weather year for the Pacific Northwest. Taking that into consideration, what does the team learn as they're going about their breeding and looking at variety trials?
Yeah, so that's actually my favorite part of this program is being able to figure out, the different climates of the different regions of the whole Pacific Northwest, and really seeing where different lines excel. So, going into spring, I think we were looking pretty good, and then it got really hot, really dry, really quick. Having those years like that, I didn't see as many late season frosts as I normally do in South or in Idaho this year. Comparing that to last year where we did see some frosts, and being able to compare winter hardiness notes on that front, but also, realizing that the general trend of what's happening in our region weather-wise is that we are getting warmer and hotter quicker than we normally have. And so finding varieties that, have, like Jim said, that winter hardiness that we need for some of those regions, but also maybe something that finishes a little bit earlier than we normally see in some of these varieties in South Idaho or in Northern Idaho. Something that's going to beat the heat, but finding that sweet spot between what's too early and is going to get hit by frost and what's too late and is going to not finish and maybe have test weight issues. So, having a really broad network of testing through University of Idaho and through Limagrain is a really great tool to be able to see where those varieties really fit. We have weather stations at almost all of our plot sites, so we take that into consideration when we're looking at yield data. We do a couple, 3-4 year averages of some of these lines before we really have a good feeling of where they're going to fit. And I mean, Brittany and Jim can contest to this. I run around like a chicken with my head cut off in the spring and the summertime trying to figure out, not just looking at data at the end of the season, but looking visually at the plots in the field to see which ones are performing better. It's a really good opportunity to put my farmer hat on and say, okay, would I want a field of this wheat in my backyard? Would I want to farm something that looks like this? And some lines can be deceiving, especially when it comes to ons and onless and all that kind of fun stuff. But generally speaking, if something looks really good in the field and then we can come back and have data to prove that and to, support that, then that's usually a pretty good sign of, okay, this line has potential. Let's make sure to prioritize this in all of the University of Idaho testing. Let's make sure we prioritize it not only in Idaho, but also Washington and Oregon as well. Because even though they're different states, some of those climate regions or growing regions can really mirror each other. And so if we know how a variety can perform in a dryland area across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, that gives us a pretty good feeling about how it's going to do consistently over the years in regions that we're going to push it.
You mentioned field days and meeting with growers and farmers. Can you tell me about field days and feedback that you're hearing from farmers on varieties?
I wish more growers would go to field days in the springtime.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, really great opportunity to see everything all at once. And I understand, plots are always going to be different than a full field. You're going to have different spots in your field that's going to affect how the wheat looks. But generally speaking, a plot tour or a field day is the best way to see all of these varieties lined up next to each other. You can really compare maturity. You can compare height. If you're looking at tech sheets, sometimes that can even be variable because you're pulling data from all of these different locations, but the grower themselves knows their ground the best. And so when they have that knowledge, they bring it to a field day and they start looking at what lines they would like to see in their field. Having those conversations and having the opportunity to have those conversations with growers is really helpful from a breeding program perspective because it gives us an idea of what growers are looking for, what they need. We always read publications about different diseases that we see in the field, but I feel like I learned so much more from talking with growers at field days because you get that firsthand knowledge of what they're seeing in their field, what they're looking for, what they need.
Are you able to take grower feedback, or is it mostly, hey, let's do a better job of seeing if we can get growers to the field days so that they can see these trials firsthand?
I think I'd like to see more grower feedback. I mean, we do have a handful of growers that will come to a lot of these field days, especially ones with if it's on their ground, they always come out and see how the varieties are doing. But I do personally think that a lot of growers will put too much interest in the actual data that comes out at the end of the year without necessarily seeing what the plot looks like. And sometimes that can be deceiving, right? If you haven't seen what the plot looks like and then you see that this variety didn't yield as well as it could have, if you had gone out to the plot and saw, oh, there's freeze damage, or oh, there's vole damage, or there's something, something happened in the field, or oh, the elk really love this variety, so it's going to reflect that in the data at the end of the year. It's helpful to kind of piece all of those pieces together to see the full big picture of what these varieties are doing in the region.
Any specific variety that stood out this year?
VI Gem had a pretty good year this year. It's been doing really pretty well across Oregon and Washington. I'm still waiting on some trial results from Idaho, but you guys are a little bit later in the game than Oregon and Washington tend to be. So, as those results roll out, I would definitely keep an eye on VI Gem. One new variety that I'm really excited about from the Varsity Idaho program is VI Encore. So it is a Clearfield product. It's named Encore because it is the encore from Presto and Magic and Voodoo. So kind of keeping the name within that same family region. But what I like about Encore is that it's going to be shorter than some of the WSU Clearfield varieties that you see on the market. Sockeye and Piranha can get a little leggy. VI Encore, it's got more of a medium height, but it's got really great straw strength. So I'm not worried about it getting too tall. I'm not worried about it lodging. It's also got really great bulletproof stripe rust resistance. And when it comes to having that natural disease resistance in the field, some growers lean on that a little bit too heavy, and they'll decide not to spray a field because of the genetic the genetic uphold of that. But any tool that we can put in the toolbox for growers is a win in my book. Another thing I like about Encore, what I've noticed this year, is that it gets out of the ground and it grows pretty well. It likes to close the rows pretty early on in the season. Usually, if you're using a Clearfield product, you're using it for weed control. That's most of the time the aspect of why growers are growing a Clearfield. Having, like I said, an extra tool in the toolbox of its early maturity, early season growth. Could be a tool in the toolbox for choking out those weeds that would like to, pop through the canopy and potentially compete for soil, water, sunlight, all that fun stuff. So VI Encore and VI Gem are probably the two varieties that I'm most excited about coming from the Varsity Idaho program. We have quite a bit of experimental lines that are coming through. The breeder, Dylan and I have loaded up Kurt and Juliet's trials this year with a lot of new material. It takes a while for some of these varieties to get to market. Some of these crosses were made a couple of years ago. The speed to market is always going to be an issue on the wheat breeding side. We're not like corn. We can't turn out a new variety every other year. But sometimes, being able to select varieties for where they're doing well, and if something, stands out with us, we work pretty hard with Foundation Seed Service in Idaho to be able to get some of these breeder seed classes blown up a little bit faster and earlier in the beginning so that growers and retailers can have access to foundation seeds as quickly as possible. That's kind of our goal, is to raise up a variety to a point where retailers can take it on, and then they can, blow it up for their growers in their region.
So no release dates yet on these two that you specified, but it could be coming soon.
So Encore and Gem are released at this point. So
they are released. Okay.
Yeah, so VI Encore, there is certified seeds available up in northern Idaho out of P&W Co-op. And VI Gem, I do have a retailer that took on VI Gem down in the Homedale area, but I'm trying really hard to push it down into South Idaho. It's a really great Ovation replacement, in my opinion. Ovation has been a variety that has been grown for probably too long, in my opinion, down in South Idaho. It needs a replacement at this point. And VI Gem it's a higher yielding, better stripe rust resistance. It's going to be similar on the maturity and height wise, so it's not going to be a big change or a big shock for growers. But having that built-in stripe rust resistance and better falling numbers, just an overall better yielding variety, I think is going to be a really nice addition to the VI lineup.
The collaboration has had strong success with the Clearfield varieties.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any more coming after the VI Gem and VI Encore?
Yeah, so most of the lines that we have up for, that we're really looking at pretty hard the next couple of years are going to be Clearfield lines. One thing I will add about Clearfield is that what I'm seeing in Washington is that a lot of growers are blending non-Clearfield and Clearfield lines together. Now, not because they want to spray both with Beyond, but VI Voodoo is a really great example. I have a lot of growers that will blend VI Voodoo Clearfield Plus in with non-traded varieties just because they like the plant type. And that's kind of a hidden tool or a hidden success, or that I would say, for these Clearfield lines, is that just because it has the trait does not necessarily mean that you have to spray it. So agronomically, if the variety works for your ground and you really like how it performs for you, you don't necessarily have to spray it with Beyond, especially when it comes into rotations. If you're worried about, planting other crops behind your wheat field, if you don't want to spray it with Beyond because of the residual, there's always an option to pick a variety that works agronomically for its plant architecture, and not have to spray it.
Hey, Bailey, I think that's a really good point, and I think that's partly what contributed to bringing Magic to basically #1 variety in the Northwest for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
It performed well. It didn't have to spray it every year, but you had the tool there if you needed it. And
Right.
Having that flexibility from a grower standpoint is really important. And we've been pretty lucky, I think, with the VI program. We've got some new Clearfield lines that I think look exceptional. So I'm thinking that our little niche in that area in the Clearfield market is hopefully going to continue for a while, and hopefully bring some added value to growers with the new material as well.
Agreed. It's one of those things where, even like Jim said, even though it's a Clearfield product, you don't necessarily have to spray it for weed control. Magic's big fall was its rust resistance really started to break down. So, to that point though, Magic has made a really great parent. I think almost all of the Clearfield lines that are coming through the program at this point have Magic in some way, and it's in its background. So, trying to, like Jim had mentioned earlier, mesh that UI Magic germplasm, how it worked well for almost everybody, with some of these European lines out of the Limagrain program that bring some more of that disease resistance, kind of meshing and creating the best of both worlds, I think is a really good opportunity for growers in Idaho.
Yeah. So the Pacific Northwest is known for it's soft white wheat.
Mhm.
Looking beyond Clearfield, is there anything in the pipeline for a non-Clearfield soft white variety?
The conventional soft whites is a it's a tight market. It's very competitive. So we've had a lot of great lines come through on the conventional side from the Varsity Idaho program, but some of them they're still in the baby phases, right? We're still trying to beat the average yield of the other conventional soft whites in the program. I think the Clearfield side of the program has been a really strong performing part of the program for a while, and so to kind of even that out, we're trying to create, that same expectation from the conventional side as well. There was a couple of lines that I was really, really excited about this year that looked really, really promising. And then at the very end, there was one little kick in the pants that made us decide not to release it. And I can see Jim shaking his head because he knows exactly which one I'm talking about. But
That one hurt. That hurt.
it hurt all of us because the yield potential is one thing, but as a breeding company, we also have a due diligence to not necessarily release varieties that could be a detriment to growers. And this line that I'm specifically talking about had really great disease package, had a really great yield potential, but at the end of the day, the quality on the falling numbers just was too high of a risk for us to move forward with its potential with its yield potential and its ability to potentially go on a lot of acres. We did not want to open up growers to have that risk of having a falling numbers issue and then having their grain rejected or docked at the elevator, when they thought that they were going to be getting a really high yielding line, and then they get kicked at the end of the season. So
If we'd have just been smart enough not to send that to the laboratory, we'd have been fine. It's one of the little mistakes along the way, but no, and it was a big disappointment and is a big disappointment. But again, it's a learning curve, and every year we do learn something new about the varieties coming through the program. Sometimes better than others, but yeah, this one is a disappointment. Part of I think, some of the strength of the program has yet to be exploited, and that is we probably haven't done as much testing in southern Idaho to exploit the material from northern Idaho as much as we could. So I'm hoping that maybe that can be a new emphasis of the program in the near future. But I also want to remind one of the strengths of the program and one of the strengths of LCS is the ability to take things to market quickly. If you've identified something worthwhile, you've always been willing to take the risk, make the jump, take it to market, and get it there quickly, because there are release windows people don't recognize. If you miss a release window for a year or two, you may lose a variety altogether. It may not make it in the marketplace. But if you can get it there earlier, and in fact, even ahead of some of the competition for the same area and same market, you have a much better advantage of having impact, getting something out of the material and investment that you've made along the way. So I think that's been an important one, contribution of LCS along the way. University programs tend to be, I'll be polite, conservative. Is that a good word for it? And
yes.
Having that business partnership and business view on the same material can be very, very helpful in positioning the variety, getting it to market, getting it to the right hands, getting it to the right growers, and making the most out of the genetics possible.
Yeah, we do a pretty good job of reaching out to retailers to have some of these lines tested in their own trials while they're still in experimental phase. So, getting these retailers a hands-on experience with the line before we've even released them. I think one thing that I would like to improve on in our capacity is having a higher amount of seed, when we are ready to release. I think retailers are interested in doing strip trials, and at this point we're not really set up to do something of that scale. So having the availability for retailers to test these lines in kind of a bulk setting instead of a plot setting, I think would be a really helpful tool in increasing interest in these lines. And really, it takes a while to get growers really sold on a variety, and sometimes that's hard in plot work, right? Because it's a plot. It's a couple feet by a couple feet. It's not a true representation of what can go across a field. But the second you start doing strip trials and you're placing varieties, over the hill, down in the ditch bank, where wheat doesn't really like to grow and where we don't really like to get plot data, that's what growers are really looking for. And so being able to get that hands-on experience before it really hits the market to really, build up that excitement about these new lines is really important.
And any of the coffee shop talk and enthusiasm about varieties obviously goes a long way into the market as well of helping those. Say, Bailey, I think it would be helpful also if you clarify a little bit the marketing angle of the VI material versus the LCS material, because you have an exclusive relationship with a genetic marketing group with LCS.
Mm-hmm.
You want to explain
Yeah.
how that kind of works?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So, I had mentioned earlier that the LCS material normally finds its home over in Oregon and Washington. So the biggest difference between the Varsity Idaho program and the Limagrain program, the Limagrain program is usually licensed exclusively to the genetic marketing group, which is made up of 4 co-ops, which is Northwest Grain Growers, Highline Grain Growers, P&W Co-op, and CHS Prime Land. Now, if you put those retailers on a map, Southern Idaho is not in that mix. And Southern Idaho sometimes gets left out of, having access to those varieties. And if like putting my grower hat back on, why would I want to go all the way up to Walla Walla or Spokane to get seed of a variety that I don't 100% know if it's going to work well in my area? Whereas the Varsity Idaho program, we are no longer going to be doing any exclusive licensing to any retailers in the future. It's more of an open release. When it comes to foundation availability, there's room for priority for different retailers to come through. But at this point, my opinion, and same with our breeders as well, the Varsity Idaho program should be open to everybody, and it should be available to all growers, especially in the state of Idaho. So, what's the point of having a Varsity Idaho program if all of our stuff is going to be tied up over in Washington? So I really use the Varsity Idaho program as a way to get growers in South Idaho especially access to some of these new and improved lines that are coming through these pipelines. And have, the first crack at them. Sometimes the LCS varieties get tied up in Washington for a couple years before they come down to South Idaho. And if I'm a grower in South Idaho, I would not really like that, right? I wouldn't want to wait 2 more years just to have access to a new line when, Varsity Idaho is right in my backyard, and maybe some of these lines in the Varsity Idaho program have the same parents as some of the LCS varieties as well. So, having the availability of seed is the most important part, and to just the quality of varieties that need to be in South Idaho for these growers. I think that that's a really, really important key tool for the Varsity Idaho program, is to focus on the area that needs us the most.
The other advantage, of course, is having someone like Bailey doing the marketing. Because the universities do, frankly, a really lousy job at business and marketing. And having you being able to put the advertising material together, put the right names and the right combinations and in the right people's hands, and being there to represent the varieties at the field days makes a huge difference on acceptance of the varieties as well. So we really do appreciate your contributions to this and recognize that that's really an important part of the program as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I have no problem talking, obviously. If you guys have ever heard me at field days, sometimes people have to tell me to shut up. So I love talking about the varieties, and I love hearing growers' experiences, right? So, having the ability to talk one-on-one with growers and say, okay, so what is your problem on your field? What's your soil type? What's your moisture? What's your annual rainfall? And helping kind of guide them in the right line of the certain varieties that might work for them. And it's one thing to see, like I mentioned, to see the data on the sheet at the end of the year. But if you don't know what VI gem is because you haven't heard someone talk about it before, it's just a name and a number on a spreadsheet at the end of the year. So, understanding the true agronomic features of those varieties, that's one of my favorite things to do, is to talk to growers about these lines. In our breeding program, we joke that Dylan and Yugwang are kind of they handle the varieties when they're in the elementary and high school phase, and then once they go off to college in the real world, that's where they enter my world. So, I kind of help them get into the big leagues and help growers actually find access to these lines so that they can become profitable with them.
But also provide that important feedback loop to Dylan and Yogwal.
Right.
Because those guys can't be everywhere and see everything along the way either. And in a lot of cases, I always said, the breeders need to be solving growers' problems before the growers know they have a problem. And for you to have that is really important. Have that feedback loop important.
Agreed. Yeah, it's hard for the breeders to get out. I mean, they have a lot more notes to take in the fields than I do. Usually, my plot walks consist of, looking at them visually, checking for disease, and then moving on. Whereas, Dylan and Ewing are taking a lot more in-depth notes. So they really focus on their plots in the area. And that's where I'm able to go to these University of Idaho field days, private field days for other events, and really, get that one-on-one experience with growers. And like Jim said, I can report back to Dylan and say, hey, this is becoming an issue in this region. What do we have in the pipeline? Let's maybe think twice before we drop that line because it has XYZ. So, it's a great tool to be collaborative in this front.
Well, Dylan and the other breeders should be working 24/7 during field season anyway, but they can't quite be everywhere.
That's
And,
true.
and even when we issue them flashlights, they tend to get a little bit weak early in the morning hours, So having that help is very important.
Yeah. Bailey, I want to share this comment and then just have one more question before we end. But Jamie and Corey Kress out of Southern Idaho, Kress Farms, appreciated you showing up at the field day at our place. It's great to hear from the companies themselves about their lines besides just the university.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. It is kind of interesting. The ag industry in general is changing. Things are really tight. Things are an interesting outlook for ag right now. But one thing that I did notice was that I think I was one of the only seed reps that showed up to a lot of these field days. And I don't know why seed reps wouldn't. I think it's an excellent way to get to know growers and to see where things are going and see how things are going. So I love being able to talk with growers, especially at field days. Usually field days are right before harvest, so guys are starting to get a little itchy about getting into the combine. And so, being able to hear what growers are excited about, how lines are looking. Sometimes a variety can look really, really bad in the springtime, and then you get to the combine and you're like, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So those reports are always good to hear too.
Okay, I have to clarify it. That was Corey on Jamie's account,
Oh,
but
well,
Jamie
thanks,
feels
Corey.
the same. Jamie feels the same way. And then one more comment from Corey. Just an urge to keep pushing Juliet from your end to include Washington State varieties and LCS varieties. So
Yeah, so that was, one thing that I noticed this year too. And I've only been with Limagrain. This is coming on to my third year, so I would still classify myself as fairly green when it comes to this program. But when I was showing up to field days this year and I was expecting to see certain lines in the field and realizing that we hadn't placed them where I should have placed them, it's a really good learning opportunity for me because we just finalized our state variety trial entries last week with breeders. So trying to figure out, okay, so I was at the Rockland field day and this is what I want to see. I was at the Soda Springs field day and this is what I wanted to see. And so that was really helpful. I think this last year was the first year that I had gone to every single U of I field day, just to really get a better idea. I live
yeah,
in Pendleton, so South Idaho isn't my home. So understanding the different growing regions down there was really helpful. Going to these field days and seeing where we should be putting these lines for this next year.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Just one last comment for you, Bailey. How do you see the partnership continuing to support resiliency and profitability for our Idaho wheat growers and PNW growers in general?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to focus strictly on Southern Idaho because if a variety does well in Southern Idaho, the likelihood of it doing well in other places, I don't necessarily want to limit that by any means. So, South Idaho, North Idaho, Idaho in general is going to be the number one priority for the Varsity Idaho program. But, if there's a broadly adapted line that we could potentially gain market share in Oregon and Washington, I would never want to discredit that or to limit that by any means. So, our first priority for the Varsity Idaho program is the state of Idaho. And like I had mentioned, Northern Idaho and Southern Idaho are two very different growing regions.
Right.
And some of the dryland conditions in South Idaho are very different than some of the dryland conditions in, Genesee, right? So figuring out not to beat a dead horse by any means, but to figure out what lines will do well in those certain regions, and then pushing them into the growers' hands and have them grow a variety that's not only adapted to their region but has been tested and proven in that region, I think is really important. At the end of the day, yield is just one thing in, that growers are looking for. There's also disease resistance, quality, agronomic features. Nobody really wants to grow a variety that's going to fall down, right? So, having those types of hints and tips and tricks on where these varieties will go, I think is going to, at the end of the day, increase the profitability for growers across the state of Idaho, knowing which variety is going to be best for them in their backyard.
Bailey, thank you.
Yeah,
On behalf of Idaho Wheat, thank you for what you do for LCS
absolutely.
and the UI collaboration. We appreciate it all.
Well,
So
thank you.
also appreciate you being with us today and sharing those insights.
Yeah.
And
Well,
to those of you, yes, go ahead.
oh, so if you guys have any questions, we do have a Varsity Idaho website that has all of our varieties listed. So I do have seed guides as well that are always in my pickup. So if you ever want me to come down to South Idaho and meet up with anyone, let me know. I'd be more than happy to bring some information with me. I'd be more than happy to come out and look at some fields as well, to listen to growers. I kind of border between salesman and an extension agent half the time, because I really want to know how growers are doing in the field, and if I can provide solutions,
Sure.
that are within the Varsity Idaho program, that's a win. But if there's also a variety that I have knowledge of that will do well for growers, I don't necessarily want a grower to be pigeonholed into a specific program just because I'm wearing my Varsity Idaho hat that day. So if growers have any questions about varieties, because I have been around the block a couple times this season, so if you guys have any questions on how things are doing in other regions as well, please feel free to reach out.
Very good. Thanks, Bailey.
Yeah.
To those of you who joined as well, thank you for being with us today. And just a reminder, we will have this out on our website as well as our YouTube and Spotify channels. And we look forward to having you all back with us in a couple of weeks for our next From the Field. Thank you all again for joining.